There's a moment near the end of Watch Out, I'm Not Just the Much King, where the camera just holds on Kyle's face in the cockpit. Blood's dripping from his eyebrow, the glass is cracked, alarms are screaming in 3 different colors, and outside, his mech is literally howling at an angel made of metal and light. And Kyle just laughs this tiny, broken laugh and says, "You picked the wrong son to throw away." That's when I realized this show had absolutely got me. Welcome back to Jonota News, and today we are diving deep into the 2026 much drama that basically slammed a rocket fist straight into my chest. If you like character-driven revenge stories, messy families, and robots that fight like starving wolves, sit down. Also, you know the drill, if you end up vibing with this breakdown, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next time a drama surprises me like this. I'm going full spoilers on this one. Ending, twists, who dies, who lives, who ends up inside which exploding cockpit, everything is fair game. There's no way to talk about why this show works without cracking it open. So if you haven't watched Watch Out, I'm Not Just the Much King yet and you care about surprises, go binge it first and come back. I'll still be here, probably still thinking about Wolf's first roar. The show sets its tone with almost ridiculous confidence. We open on the Crown Circuit Finals, and it is pure spectacle. The arena is a kilometer-wide crater lined with light pylons, the sky above stained purple from the ion shield, and 2 Titanic mechs facing off in the dust. One is Kyle Arden's regal blue and gold unit, regalia rakes, all sharp lines and ceremonial armor. The other is this brute of a siege mech that looks like someone welded a battleship onto legs. The sound design goes heavy. Sub-bass rumbles every time a foot hits the ground, servo whines cut through the commentary, and over all of it you hear the chant from the crowd, "Mecha King. Mecha King." It's loud, gaudy, and the show is basically yelling at you, look at him. Look what he has. Now watch us take it all away. The first thing that hooked me wasn't actually the robots, though, it was Kyle's smile. Yu Taijin plays him with this mix of arrogance and weird vulnerability right from the start. He's grinning as he toys with his opponent, but every time the camera cuts to the VIP box where his father is sitting, that smile flickers. Damon Arden, Supreme Marshal of the Crown Armada, doesn't clap. He just watches, hands folded, jaw tight. You can feel the history in one shot. Kyle's the golden boy, the reigning 3-time champion, crowned Much King by the media. But the one man he actually wants approval from is treating this monumental victory like a midweek training simulation. And the show knows exactly what it's doing with that dynamic. After Kyle inevitably wins, because of course he does, the confetti cannons fire, the crowd goes insane, the broadcasters start screaming about another flawless victory for the Much King. Then Kyle looks up into the VIP glass, and Damon isn't even there anymore. He's already walked out. No congratulatory wave, no nod. Just absence. That's the first hairline crack in Kyle's world, and you can feel the resentment starting to simmer under his cocky exterior. What's smart is that before the framing and exile ever happen, the drama spends real time making Kyle's life feel full and worth losing. He's not just a champion, he has a crew that actually loves him. Jaivu, his engineer, who swears at the mech like it can hear him. Leon, the soft-spoken strategist who sits in the control room quietly calling out enemy patterns, clearly half in love with Kyle's insane instincts. There's a quick little scene at a ramen stand after the match where everyone's drunk on adrenaline and cheap alcohol, Kyle holding 2 bowls at once, bragging that he could beat any mech in the circuit blindfolded, his crew pelting him with napkins. It feels like a family. Messy, loud, and a bit dysfunctional, sure, but a found family that anchors him against his father's coldness. And that's important, because the betrayal that hits at the end of the first episode hits harder when you've actually seen what Kyle stands to lose. The framing itself happens fast. One moment, Kyle is at a victory gala, half listening to a counselor drone about military budgets, bored out of his mind. Then Admiral Rian Vale, his former mentor and now rival golden boy of the Armada, pulls him aside with this pretense of a congratulations. Menesiojo plays Rian with this soft-eyed charm that feels harmless until you start noticing how often he's just observing. There's something you should see, he tells Kyle, and that's the last calm moment we get for a while. They take him to a classified briefing room. Lights dim, a hollow screen pops up. Footage plays, a mech, unmistakably Regalia Rakes, standing at the edge of a refugee convoy on the border world of Hespera. No arena, no crowd. The mech lifts its arm. Beam cannons spin up. And then it just rips through the convoy. Civilian transports exploding one by one, people screaming on the comms, that same Regalia insignia glowing bright on the shoulder. The recording ends on a freeze frame of the carnage. Silence. This is where the show flexes its grip on character. Kyle's first reaction isn't denial, it's confusion. That's not possible, he says, but it's not played like a defiant hero speech. It's small. Shaken. You can see him trying to reconcile what he's seeing with the mech he knows like his own body. He asks when this happened, who authorized it, whether Regalia could have been hacked. And every answer is a wall. Hespera, 48 hours ago. No record of unauthorized access. His personal neural signature is on every firing log. The betrayal doesn't come from Rian at first, it comes from his father. Damon walks in halfway through the debrief, and for a heartbeat Kyle relaxes. Dad's here. Dad will fix this. Damon listens to one of the investigators outline the evidence, falsified logs, doctored telemetry, edited footage that makes it look airtight. Yu Taijin is practically begging with his eyes without actually dropping to his knees, and Damon doesn't even meet his gaze. He says the line that sets up their whole tragedy, "You taught me yourself the system is stronger than any one man. I won't tear it apart for you." What follows is one of the coldest exile scenes I've seen in a drama like this. There's no big courtroom. No theatrical trial. Just a small military tribunal, sterile and impersonal, where Kyle's lawyers clearly understand that the decision has already been made. Damon signs the orders along with the counsel. You can see his hand hesitate, but he signs. Kyle begs him to at least look at him, to hear him out of record. "If you are innocent," Damon says, "live long enough to prove it." It sounds almost merciful, but Choi Kang-woo plays it with this brittle, exhausted detachment that makes it so much worse. He's not choosing justice. He's choosing convenience dressed up as principle. And the show doesn't let him off the hook for that even when he later realizes he was wrong. If the first episode is about showing us everything Kyle has, status, family, mech, reputation, and then tearing down the foundation, the second episode burns the house to the ground. Literally. His exile transport is sabotaged on the way to some quiet panel colony. Instead, it's diverted to Graveyard Theta 9, where obsolete war machines go to die. The imagery here is honestly gorgeous in that, wow, I'm small and the universe wants me dead kind of way. The shuttle descends into a rust-colored atmosphere, static arcs over the hull, fields of dead mechs stretch to the horizon like a forest of broken giants. You can tell the VFX team had fun making everything feel sharp and heavy and lethal. Then they crash him. He wakes up half buried in scrap, coated in dust, alarms whining in a pitch that sounds more like screaming. Regalia Rakes is gone, just a mangled shoulder plate and a shattered crown emblem near the wreck. His neural link implant is fried, sparking. His crew? Gone. No bodies on screen yet, just empty seats, burned straps, and this horrible silence. The show doesn't confirm their fates right away, and that uncertainty haunts Kyle and us for a good stretch. We see him stumble through this graveyard as towering mech torsos loom above him like tombstones. This is where the drama pivots from glossy arena story to something much more tactile and grimy. Theta 9 is alive. The wind carries flakes of oxidized metal that catch in Kyle's hair. Lightning storms roll over seas of junk, illuminating skeletal frames of forgotten machines. The soundscape becomes the groan of shifting scrap and the distant clank of something large moving where nothing should be moving. And then the scavengers show up. Jessa Kade is the first one we meet, sliding down a dune of armored plating on a makeshift board like she's snowboarding hell. Kim Hyeon gives her this wild, restless energy. she's the kind of character who will laugh in the face of a gun and then sell the gun 5 minutes later. She clocks Kyle's jumpsuit, recognizes the prisoner markings, and immediately tries to strip anything valuable off him. Their first conversation is pure friction. Kyle's still clinging to titles, "I'm Kyle Arden. I'm the Crown's Much King," and Jessa just stares at him like he claimed to be god of trash. "Out here, you're meat," she says, yanking the fried implant module out of his neck harness. "Learn fast or die fast." But, credit to the writing, they don't turn Kyle into a whiny prince about it. He doesn't spend 3 episodes moaning about his lost glory. You see him hit rock bottom hard. There's a scene where he tries to manually lift a shattered mecha arm to prove he's not helpless, and his muscles literally give out, dropping the thing inches from crushing his leg. He's panting, shaking, coughing up gravel, and Jessa just leans against a nearby chassis, unimpressed, and tosses him a canteen. "Drink, rakes, tomorrow I'll teach you how to steal cable without getting fried." What the show does next with Theta 9 is one of my favorite stretches of the whole series, honestly, and I know that's a bit contrarian because most people point to the Capital City final. But there's something so grounded about this scrapyard arc. It becomes this weirdly intimate survival story set against a backdrop of towering robot corpses. Kyle ends up working under a local fixer, Taro Imani, who runs a tiny scrapyard compound fortified with welded-together mech plates and anti-raid turrets. Taro is ex-military, dishonorably discharged for punching a superior officer, and Kim Seokjun plays him with the laid-back exhaustion of a man who has permanently given up on the system but still cares about people in front of him. There's an early dinner scene in Taro's compound that quietly sets up Kyle's entire emotional trajectory. They're eating questionable stew, Jessa's making fun of Kyle's soft hands, and a young kid runs in screaming that the grave is howling again. Everyone goes quiet. Taro brushes it off as superstition in front of Kyle, but later that night, we see him standing at the edge of a scrap cliff, listening. In the distance, something is moving under the junk. You hear a metal-on-metal screech that sounds unnervingly organic. That's our first hint of the feral mech. The show teases Ruin Wolf for a couple of episodes. Nighttime shots of dunes collapsing inward as something burrows. A close-up of 2 red optics flickering briefly between twisted beams. Stories from the locals, it's a ghost mech, cursed, a prototype that devoured its own pilots. People use it to scare kids into staying close to camp. The rumor is that whoever tames it could sell it for enough money to buy their way off Theta 9 entirely. And you can see the idea latch onto Kyle's brain. By this point, the Vengeance arc is starting to really crystallize. He hears rumors through Taro's black market channels that Rian has taken his place in the Crown circuit, piloting a state-of-the-art frame built by Avery's Dynamics. Worse, the media on the inner worlds has fully swallowed the Butcher of Hespera narrative. The broadcasts show Kyle's face with wanted banners, talk about him like he's a monster. There's a scene of him watching one of these shaky news feeds on a flickering holo from a salvaged antenna, fists clenched so hard his nails draw blood. That's the moment he stops thinking about proving his innocence and starts thinking, very clearly, about payback. The decision to go after the feral mech is born out of a mix of desperation and that same arrogance we saw in the first episode. He tells Jessa and Taro, "If I can sync with it, no one in the circuit can stop me." And Taro just stares at him like he's insane. The nice thing is, Taro doesn't do the cliché, "you can't, you mustn't" thing. Instead he says, "You are not the first to try. I buried the last 3." Which is somehow worse. The sequence where Kyle actually finds Ruin Wolf is one of the show's best directed mini set pieces. It starts with silence. There's no score, just the crunch of his boots over layered scrap and the occasional ping of cooling metal. He's following a trail Jessa mapped from old sensor pings, deep into the no-go zones of Theta 9, where the junk is stacked so high it becomes a kind of canyon system. The lighting is all deep blues and sharp lunar whites, like the planet's second, smaller moon is doing the cinematography. He climbs over a ridge of collapsed mechs, their open cockpits like dead eyes. Then the ground trembles. A cascade of bolts and screws begins to slide down the far dune, like a metal avalanche happening in slow motion. The camera cuts low and we see something huge moving beneath the surface, displacing trash like a whale in an ocean. Kyle freezes, squints. Two slashes of crimson light blink on in the dark. Ruinwolf erupts from the junk in a shower of shards. The design is so good. It's not sleek or noble like Regalia, it's hunched, predatory, with digitigrade legs and elongated arms whose fingers end in articulated claws. Its torso can reconfigure between a humanoid silhouette and a more lupine, quadrupedal mode, plates sliding and snapping with this horrifying precision. Parts of its armor are mismatched, like it's literally grown pieces from other mechs it's devoured. Every movement carries this impression of barely contained violence. The sound it makes when it first roars? It's not just metal grinding. They layered animal growls, reversed glass shatters, low engine revs. It feels like the machine itself is angry to be awake. That roar hits Kyle physically. He staggers back, hands over his ears, blood trickling from his nose as his half-fried neural implant reacts to the mecha's M output. This is where the show takes a risk. Instead of doing the classic, chosen pilot, hand-on-hill moment with glowing lights and destiny, it makes the first contact between Kyle and Ruinwolf absolutely brutal. He tries to climb up its side, searching for an access panel, yelling over the vine that he can set it free, that they can tear the sky open together. It doesn't understand words, all it senses is intrusion. A cable whips out of its shoulder port like a striking snake, latches onto Kyle's harness, and slams him against the hull. The camera goes handheld, his vision blurs, you hear whispers of machine code in the sound mix, like corrupted choir music. They do a neural handshake sequence that feels more like a horror movie than a sci-fi bonding moment. Kyle's consciousness drops into this abstract space, darkness lit by floating fragments of battle logs. Explosions, cockpit screams, sudden cut-offs. Over all of it, the presence of Ruinwolf, this immense, animalistic mind built from pain. Every previous pilot's terror, every forced reboot, every command that made it kill against its will. It's snarling at him, showing him teeth made of jagged code. Yu Taijin nails this. Instead of trying to dominate it, Kyle does the only thing that actually makes sense for his character at this point, he gets angry right back. He screams at it. You think you're the only one they used? They used me, too. They threw me away, too. It's not some noble speech, it's raw and selfish. But it hits a nerve. He shows Ruinwolf his own memories, arena crowds cheering, his father looking away, the tribunal. The editing cuts between metal carnage and emotional carnage, visually paralleling their betrayals. That's the bond. Not destiny, not purity of heart, but shared rage at being turned into tools. Ruinwolf doesn't submit to him. It doesn't purr or nuzzle or flash green lights of acceptance. What it does is stop trying to kill him. The cable releases its chokehold just enough for him to breathe. The neural space shifts from red to a colder, watchful glow. It's more like, fine. Let's see how far this goes, little human. Back in the real world, Kyle collapses on its hull, gasping, then starts laughing like a madman. That laugh echoes across the junk canyon as the mecha's eyelights dial down from lethal glare to a lower, predatory simmer. From there, the show settles into this really satisfying training and scheming groove. Kyle, Jessa, and Taro turn Ruinwolf into their ticket off-world. They retrofit a half-broken hangar into a makeshift base. Jessa installs a jury-rigged control rig into the cockpit that can handle Ruinwolf's massive neural throughput, layering custom code over its feral AI to prevent full pilot devouring. Taro handles the physical rehab, reinforcing joints, scrounging armor from fallen heavy frames, welding on anti-boarding systems because apparently Ruinwolf has a habit of trying to eat anyone who gets too close. This is where you start to feel Ruinwolf as a character in its own right. The mech sulks. That sounds ridiculous, but the animators give it these tiny behaviors that sell the idea. When Kyle ignores it for too long, its optics dim and it retracts its limbs tight, like it's conserving energy but also refusing to perform. When Jessa tries to tweak its code without Kyle present, it throws a minor tantrum, triggering localized quakes that knock tools off tables. It absolutely hates being tethered, anytime Taro attaches restraining clamps it tests them, slowly, over hours, until they groan. The first true combat sequence with Ruinwolf is an underground scrap fighting ring, and it is feral in the best sense. Magistrate Son, Theta 9's local warlord, runs these illegal mech brawls for entertainment and profit. He discovers Kyle has bonded with the ghost mech and basically makes him an offer, fight for me in the pits, and I'll give you a forged identity chip and passage off-world when you've made me enough money. Say no, and I strip that monster of yours for parts and sell its core to the people who framed you. Son is a simple character on paper, but Park Ho-chul plays him with this weasel charisma that makes him fun to hate. He's constantly eating something, nuts, candy, bits of dried meat, while talking about human lives like they're disposable. In another story he'd be the main villain, here he's just one more predator in a universe full of them. The arena itself is the opposite of the Grand Crown circuit. It's a cramped crater lined with rabid scavengers screaming for gore. The lighting flickers, half the holo displays are glitching, and the mechs they send against Ruinwolf are sad patchwork things, held together more by spite than engineering. Kyle steps into the cockpit and, this is a key detail, there's no comforting familiar layout like Regalia. Everything is wrong. The controls are fluid, almost organic, the interface responds to thought more than hand movement. Ruinwolf demands instinct, not protocol. The moment the fight starts, Kyle tries to approach it like a standard match, keep distance, test the opponent's range, manage heat. Ruinwolf, on the other hand, sees an enemy and launches itself forward like a wild animal. The camera rides on its shoulder as it drops to all fours, claws digging into metal, then springs up to latch onto the other mecha's chest, tearing through armor with terrifying speed. The other pilot doesn't even have time to process what's happening before their cockpit is exposed and Son is yelling on the mic for Kyle to leave something salvageable. Kyle has to literally pull back on the neural link, wrestling Ruinwolf's bloodlust away from total kill. That tension, between his tactical brain and Ruinwolf's urge to annihilate, is one of the show's most compelling recurring conflicts. It's not the simplistic, the machine is evil, it's that the machine's survival strategy was forged in endless, cruel combat, and it has never been taught restraint. Kyle has to teach it, while also using that ferocity to win. Every time they fight in those early episodes, Kyle ends up stumbling out of the cockpit soaking in sweat, muscles trembling, eyes dilated. Ruinwolf is learning him, too. There's a mid-fight moment I loved where Kyle is about to dodge a blow the way he would in Regalia, clean, elegant sidestep, but Ruinwolf instead decides to take the hit on its left shoulder, twist into the blow, and use the momentum to flip the enemy. Kyle's shock bleeds into exhilaration. You bastard, he laughs, that was actually good. That's their love language, shared violence and snark. What keeps this arc from becoming just a training montage is how tightly it's woven into Kyle's psychological journey. You watch him shift from wanting to prove his innocence to actively embracing his new monstrous image as a weapon. Jessa calls him out on it in one of the strongest dialogue scenes on Theta 9. They're sitting on top of Ruinwolf's shoulder at dawn, feet dangling over a drop that would absolutely kill them. Jessa says, you know they're not gonna clap for you if you go back. You get that, right? Kyle, staring at the Sunrise, replies, I don't need claps. I just need them to choke on my name. It's chilling because you believe him. And yet, underneath all that fury, the show never lets you forget the kid we met in episode 1 who just wanted his dad to clap once. There's a small, blink-and-you-miss-it scene where Kyle finds an old Crown Circuit broadcast chip in a pile of trash, a recording of one of his early matches. He watches younger him on a flickering holo, all bright-eyed and cocky, and rewinds the exact second the camera cuts to Damon actually smiling, proud. It's the only time the broadcast ever caught that look. He watches it again. And again. Then, quietly, he crushes the chip in his hand and drops the pieces into Ruinwolf's exposed core vent, like feeding his nostalgia to the machine. Just when this scrapyard rhythm feels stable, the show yanks us toward the larger story again. Magistrate Son reveals his actual price for the forged identity. There's an off-world transport headed to the Caldris frontier, carrying a sealed Avaries Dynamics container. Son wants the contents. The problem is, the transport is under Crown escort, and the only way to get near it without being vaporized is to sign up for the Caldress qualifier matches for the next Crown circuit. In other words, Kyle has to step back into the exact world that spat him out, but under a fake name, with a mech that everyone would consider a war crime if they knew what it was. This is the kind of plot turn that could feel contrived, but the show earns it because Avaris has already been hovering around the edges of the story through ads, salvage tags, and whispers about new autonomous combat solutions. You know they're tied to Ruinwolf somehow. Sean doesn't spell out what's inside the container, he doesn't care about the why, just the value. But the word Avaris makes Kyle's jaw clench. That's the same logo that was stamped on some of the doctored logs from Hespera. It's all connected, and he can smell it. So they go. There's a rough and ready launch sequence where Taro retrofits an old dropship chassis into something that can technically achieve orbit if you hit it hard enough. Ruinwolf is chained inside, crouched like a caged animal, red optics dimmed. Jessa and Taro argue over who gets to babysit the power core. Kyle sits in the cockpit, hand braced against the interior hull, eyes closed, running through the plan. The music swells with this mix of hopeful and anxious strings, undercut by Ruinwolf's faint mechanical growl. When they breach the atmosphere and see the stars for the first time in what feels like forever, Kyle's expression softens. He murmurs, "I'm coming back," and you know he doesn't mean to the stars. He means back to the Empire, back to the arena, back to the man who threw him away. The Caldress frontier is a stroke of world-building genius. It's not the polished capital yet, that's saved for later. Caldress is this sprawling station world half-built into an asteroid ring, a messy collision of cultures, corporations, and mercs. It's where the lower-tier qualifiers for the Crown Circuit take place, far from the polite gaze of the elite. Think crowded docks, neon-lit mech gantries, street vendors selling grilled something on skewers right under signs advertising sponsorship deals for pilots. Visually, it's a feast. The show switches color palettes again. Theta 9 was rusty oranges and cold blues, Caldress is saturated neon and all slick blacks. The editing picks up speed, we get quick montages of mechs stomping through hangars, pilots arguing with handlers, holographic posters of Rian Whale as the new Mudge King plastered everywhere. The first time Kyle walks past one of those posters with his hood up and forged ID chip humming in his pocket, you can practically feel the heat of his humiliation through the screen. He competes under the alias, Kade Ash, a neat little nod to Jessa's surname that also plays into the "from the ashes" thing without being too on the nose. Jessa forges his licensing with enough skill that the local officials don't look twice. Ruinwolf, on the other hand, is harder to hide. They weld scavenged plating over its more distinctive jagged parts, slapping on the scheme of some obsolete model to make it look like a heavily modified junker. But even hobbled, it moves with this lethal grace that turns heads. The first Caldress match is where we really see how far Kyle has come as a pilot, and how far he still has to go. He's up against a mid-tier merc called Gallows, piloting a brawler mech with a brutal close combat loadout. The crowd underestimates Kyle immediately. His entry stats list him as a no-name from a derelict sector, his mech as uncatalogued salvage. The commentary is condescending. Let's see if this rookie survives long enough to give us a decent show. And then the gate opens. The staging of this fight is fantastic. Gone is the shaky, chaotic camera work of the scrap bits. This is broadcast-ready coverage, with smooth tracking shots and slick HUD overlays. Kyle uses Ruinwolf's quadrupedal mode to dart in low, almost disappearing from conventional mech silhouettes. He weaves between Gallows's heavy swings with inhuman timing, every near-miss throwing sparks that illuminate Ruinwolf's teeth like armor ridges. At one point, he actually runs up the arena wall, using magnetized claws to defy gravity for just a second before flipping behind Gallows and tearing open a joint. The crowd, initially bored, slowly loses its mind. The noise rises with every impossible dodge. Rian Whale is watching from a VIP lounge, casually sipping something expensive, expression unreadable. Lysa Marrow, CEO of Avaris, sits beside him, eyes narrowing as she watches Ruinwolf move. The camera lingers longer on her than it needs to, telling us she recognizes something. But Kyle nearly blows it. In the final exchange, Ruinwolf sees an opening to finish Gallows messily, rip open the cockpit, spill pilot. It surges forward, overriding Kyle's restraint protocols. He feels that feral urge like a hunger in his veins. For a split second, the show cuts to Damon on distant Halia, watching the match via delayed feed, leaning forward because something about that movement pattern is stirring old instincts. In the ring, Kyle makes a choice. He slams neural brakes so hard he physically screams, forcing Ruinwolf to redirect the killing blow into a disabling one, severing the mecha's legs, leaving the cockpit intact. He wins. But he also almost loses himself. And the show is careful to underline that the boundary between using the beast and becoming the beast is razor thin for him. What I love here is how the drama uses the tournament structure not just as eye candy but as a pressure cooker for Kyle's moral arc. Every match becomes this test: how far will he go, and what does victory cost? He could likely rise faster if he let Ruinwolf off the leash completely, but then he'd confirm everything they say about him. Butcher of Hespera label hangs over every move he makes, even as Kade Ash. It's like he's fighting two opponents in every arena, the mech across from him, and the narrative that wants to swallow him whole. Between bouts, the show quietly builds the conspiracy. Jessa hacks partial manifests from the Avarice container they're supposed to intercept and discovers it's not just spare parts, it's an adaptive AI core, serial number X1. That's when Kyle realizes Ruinwolf, labeled X0 in some of its deeper code, is not a one-off monster. It's a prototype. A test. Avarice is trying again, and this time they have the full backing of the Crown Council, using the tournament as both testing ground and PR campaign for safer, autonomous warframes. Rian, meanwhile, is pushed into more openly antagonistic territory. Up until now, the show has played him like an uneasy mix of rival and fake friend. But in one of the best mid-season scenes, he recognizes Kyle mid-fight before anyone else does. It's just a tilt of the head, the way Ruinwolf counters a particular feint that only someone who used to train with Kyle would catch. Later, in a quiet corridor, he confronts Kade alone. It's a pristine, white-lit hallway overlooking the Calder's dock. Ruinwolf looms in the distance, chained to a berth like a sleeping dragon. Rian steps into Kyle's path and says, "You really think a hood and some new scars can hide you from me?" There's no anger in his voice. Just this resigned amusement. Kyle goes still. Jessa reaches instinctively for the shock baton at her hip, but Rian doesn't even look at her. His entire focus is on Kyle, cataloging the way he holds himself differently now, like each step is calculated in case he has to dodge a bullet. Their conversation is electric. Rian tells him, casually, that the exile was necessary, that someone had to play the villain to keep the empire stable. They were going to pin Hespera on someone, he says. Better you than a dozen no-names no one would miss, right? At least your fall meant something. It's the show tipping its hand. The framing wasn't a personal vendetta, it was a political calculus. Kyle's fame made him the perfect sacrificial lamb. Kyle doesn't shout. That's what hit me. He lowers his voice, and that makes it scarier. You signed off on it. Rian doesn't deny it. We all did. Including my father. That's the one question Kyle has been chasing this whole time, really. Rian hesitates just a fraction too long. That's the confirmation. What the show does with Rian from here is interesting. It would be easy to just turn him into a cackling villain, but Minesi plays him as someone who genuinely believes in the greater good, even as that good involves feeding his best friend into the machine. Later episodes will crack that open more, but even here, you see the seeds. You were always better at being the hero, Kyle, he says. Turns out I'm better at being what the world actually needs. It's such a quietly horrifying line. After this confrontation, the stakes shift. It's no longer just, can Kyle win enough matches to get close to the Avarice container? It's, how does he expose a crime when the people who committed it wrote the law? And underneath that, like a splinter in his heart, did my father ever, even privately, doubt that I was guilty? That question hangs over every look Damon gives the screens back on Helia, every time he pulls up Kyle's old flight logs and rewatches them in his darkened office. One of my favorite subtle choices in the show is how Damon's arc runs parallel to Kyle's without intersecting until very late. In these Cauldress episodes, we see Damon alone more often. He's sitting in war room briefings while counselors like Lisa Marrow push for more Avery's contracts, more AI oversight, fewer human pilots. He looks tired. When one of his aides mentions a new qualifier pilot on Cauldress with an unusual, fighting style, you see him almost not care. He's buried himself in duty to keep from thinking about his son. But then the aide mentions the mech moves like a beast that learned to dance, and that phrasing snaps something awake in him. Meanwhile, the personal stakes for Kyle's found family climb. Taro ends up badly injured after a raid on their temporary Cauldress hideout. Someone leaks Ruinwolf's birth coordinates to a syndicate who think they can steal it. The attack sequence is tight and tense. It's mostly on foot, Jessa and Taro defending Ruinwolf's sleeping form with nothing but shock batons and jury-rigged defense drones. The mech tries to wake, thrashing in its restraints, but without Kyle in the cockpit it risks going fully feral. Taro takes a plasma shot to the side shielding Jessa, and the entire hangar nearly collapses. When Kyle returns and sees the blood on the floor, his face goes cold. There's no melodramatic screaming at the ceiling. Instead, he walks straight past the medtechs, goes to Ruinwolf, and rests his forehead against the console. "You feel that?" he whispers into the neural link. Ruinwolf's imagery in his mind shifts, not just battlefields now, but the hangar attack, Jessa's fear, Taro's pain filtered through distant sensors. That's what they do. They break the ones who stand next to you. You still okay with just surviving? It's the moment he fully commits to going after everyone who built the system that created both of them. And the show quietly raises the ante again. Son's timeline moves up. The Avery's transport is arriving sooner than expected, and if they miss their window, everything they've risked so far is meaningless. They plan a theft during one of the highest-profile qualifier rounds, using the chaos of the arena as cover. Jessa will slip into Avery's stock control systems, Taro will coordinate from their hideout despite his injury, and Kyle will keep all eyes on him by making his next fight absolutely unmissable. That's where the Cauldress arc builds to one of its best mech-on-mech duels, and the point where the show decides to pull the mask off in front of the whole galaxy. Kyle's up against a mysterious, ghost frame pilot whose mech is less a single unit and more a shifting swarm of microdrones that can reconfigure into different shapes mid-fight. On the meta level, yeah, it's very, someone in the writer's room really wanted to animate a mech sandstorm, but you know what? It works. The ghost frame moves like a nightmare, its body dissolves into a cloud of needle-sized bots, flows around attacks, then reconsolidates to strike from unexpected angles. The early part of the fight is brutal for Kyle. Ruinwolf is a close combat monster, it wants something solid to tear apart. The swarm gives it nothing to grab onto. Kyle takes hit after hit from these stinging, slicing tendrils. Shields drop, armor peels away in ugly strips. Every few seconds we cut to Damon on Helia watching the delayed broadcast, knuckles white on the arm of his chair, something like dread creeping in despite himself. The choreography here is so smart because it forces Kyle to lean into Ruinwolf's other nature, not just a brute, but an adaptive predator. In a moment of insane gamble, he cuts power to most of Ruinwolf's weapon systems, rerouting everything into an overclock of its sensory switch and emitters. He essentially turns the mech into a giant, angry magnet and antenna. The swarm's particles, being partially metallic, react, their formation disrupted. The ghost frame starts glitching, its elegant flows breaking into clumsy clumps. But the overclock comes at a cost. Ruinwolf's core begins to overheat. Warning scream. In the neural space, Kyle feels like his skull is on fire. And here's the really cool touch. As the mecha's safe ties fail, some of its most deeply buried memories bleed into his mind, snapshots of lab technicians screaming as tests go wrong, code burns, a previous pilot begging someone to turn it off while their neural link fries them alive. Kyle is riding not just his own pain, but Ruinwolf's history of being tortured into performance. He doesn't back off. Instead, he does something incredibly reckless. He drops the remaining Governor Jessa coded that keeps Ruinwolf's AI at a controllable volume. For a heartbeat, the mech becomes fully awake in his mind. Its rage and terror and vicious joy slam into him like a wave. The swarm around them shivers, buffeted by the amplified M field. And for the first time, Ruinwolf doesn't just react, it strategizes. It predicts the ghost frame's next dispersal pattern, lunges preemptively into the thickest concentration, and rips the core control node out of midair. The arena explodes in cheers as the ghost frame crashes, its swarm collapsing like a dying storm. Sparks rain down. Ruinwolf, smoking and scorched, stands in the middle of the carnage like an animal that just took down a pack of hyenas with its bare teeth. Kyle is barely conscious. We get a close-up shot inside the cockpit. His nose is bleeding, veins standing out in his neck, eyes blown wide from the neural overload. The screens flicker, cycling through Ruinwolf's internal vitals, all red. He should do the sensible thing, leave, get medical attention. Instead, he makes the choice that changes the trajectory of the entire narrative. He reaches up, unclips his helmet, and throws it down. The arena cameras catch his face, sweat-streaked and furious. For a second, there's confusion. Who is this? Then some crowd member watching on a lagging ancient holo nudges the person next to them. Another screen pulls up an old wanted notice. One by one. Recognition spreads like fire in dry grass. Kyle Arden. The exiled Mud's King. The Butcher of Hespera. Standing alive in their arena. The broadcast directors don't even have time to cut the feed. Damon sees his son's face blown up across the Helia war room wall. Ryan, watching from a private lounge, goes still, expensive drink forgotten on the table. Lysa's carefully composed expression fractures for the first time. You actually see her curse under her breath. Caldris's local crowd falls into this airy, anticipatory hush as they realize what they're looking at. Kyle stares straight into the nearest camera. His voice, when he speaks, is hoarse but unwavering. You wanted a monster, he says. Here I am. Ruinwolf punctuates it by raising its head and unleashing a roar that overloads a few of the arena's cheaper mics. Screens glitch, audio distorts, but the message lands. That's where a lot of shows would cut the episode, fade to black, roll credits on the cliffhanger. Watch out, I'm not just the Much King, doesn't. It leans into the chaos that explodes immediately afterwards. Security forces flood the arena. Fans either flee or start filming everything on their handhelds. Some of them are actually cheering for him, because to them, the idea of the disgraced legend crashing the qualifiers is the most exciting thing that's happened all season. Others are yelling, "Murderer," and throwing trash. It's a mess, and the show loves it. Back in Helios Command Tower, Damon has the opposite problem. His counselors erupt into panicked chatter. We need to shut down the feed. This proves he's dangerous. Send a capture order. Damon's face is a mask. You can't tell if he's terrified, furious, or something worse. He orders the feed left on. I want to see exactly what he does, and that's the first tiny break in his rigid obedience to protocol. He's no longer just following the political script, he's watching his son. On Caldris, Kyle and Ruinwolf stand their ground as soldiers surround them, weapons trained. You can see Jessa in the control booth frantically rerouting power to bay doors, Taro shouting into a comm for them to fall back to the hangar. But Kyle doesn't retreat. He opens a public channel, letting his voice broadcast not just to the arena, but to every linked feed in the sector. You framed me, he says, staring up toward where he knows the cameras are. You erased my crew, my life, and you think you get to do it again. His voice cracks just a little on crew, and that crack does more than any flowery speech would have. The episode ends not with a physical blow, but with a promise. Kyle declares, on a galaxy-wide broadcast, I'm coming for the crown. I'm coming for the ones who built this lie. And I'm bringing the thing you're really afraid of. The camera cuts to Ruinwolf's optics flaring, reflected in the shattered arena glass. to burning eyes, full of fury and something like anticipation. And that's where I'm going to pause recounting the plot for now, because from this point on, the show starts weaving in even bigger political explosions, deeper father-son confrontations, and some of the wildest mech battles I've seen on TV. The way it escalates from this Cauldress reveal to the final showdown on Helia is honestly a masterclass in raising stakes without losing the human core. But before we jump into that whole second half and talk about Damon finally admitting he was wrong, Rian's twisted martyr complex, and what actually happens when Ruinwolf goes fully unleashed in a populated city, I want to dig a little deeper into why these earlier arcs land so hard emotionally. Because it's not just the big speeches and flashy fights, it's the groundwork the show lays in the quiet spaces, the messy moral lines it refuses to clean up, and the way it keeps asking the same uncomfortable question: what does it really mean to be someone else's weapon? It keeps circling that question in smarter ways than you expect. It's not just Kyle and Ruinwolf, it's everyone. Damon as a weapon wielded by the Council. Rian as a pretty, polished blade for avarice. Lian, later, turned into something far more disturbing than a casualty. Even Jessa, in her own smaller orbit, is constantly being nudged into using her genius to prop up systems she hates, because hey, a girl's gotta eat. That's the part of the show that gets under your skin when the explosions fade. Every character has to decide whether they're a hand holding the weapon or the weapon being held, and it's rarely as clean a distinction as they want it to be. Right after Kyle outs himself on Cauldress, you feel that theme clamp down. Overnight, his face goes from grainy wanted posters and conspiracy forums to live feeds and pirate channels. There's a montage where we see clips of his speech replayed in the dingiest dive bars on mining moons, in officers' mess halls on patrol frigates, in a cramped apartment where a kid is wearing a knockoff Mudge King hoodie 2 sizes too big. Some people call him a terrorist, some call him a hero, most just whisper like the universe suddenly shifted an inch to the left. The system that thought it buried him now has to react to his ghost kicking down the door. The Crown's official response is predictably panicked. Publicly, they issue this slick statement about an ongoing security situation and assure everyone that a rogue pilot will be neutralized. Privately, they put a bounty on his head so big every merc and bounty hunter this side of the frontier suddenly becomes very interested in one unruly salvaged mech. You'd think Rian would recuse himself on the grounds of massive conflict of interest, but no. The Council names him official liaison to Avarice Security and gives him a clear mandate: bring Kyle in or put him down. What's refreshing is that the show doesn't pretend Kyle can play cat and mouse on Cauldress forever. He and his team realize instantly that the station just turned from opportunity into cage. The escape from Cauldress is less about slick heists and more about scrambling, desperate improvisation, and that makes it feel properly dangerous. Magistrate Son, ever the cockroach, tries to cash out early by selling Ruinwolf's location to Avarice. Jessa catches the encrypted transmission halfway through, and the confrontation scene between her and Son is vicious in a very human way. No mechs, just a filthy office, a gun on the desk, and years of being exploited snapping in her eyes. She walks in without knocking, throws the decoded message at him, and says, "You were gonna sell us." He doesn't even deny it. He just shrugs, popping another nut into his mouth. "You sold yourself the minute you bonded that monster." "I'm just collecting interest." She shoots him in the leg. Not fatal, not heroic, just ugly and furious. While he's writhing and cursing on the floor, she leans over him and hisses, "You are not the only one who knows how to make a deal." Then she walks out with his master access key and an armful of data slates. It's one of those moments where the show quietly admits, no one gets out of this clean. Armed with Son's codes and some irresponsibly risky hacking, Jessa manages to pivot their planned theft of the Avarice container into something larger. Instead of just grabbing the X-1 core and running, she reroutes the entire cargo shuttle's autodock to a maintenance bay right under their repaired dropship. Taro, half-conscious and stitched up in a jump seat, grumbles that his retirement plans did not include hijacking corporate Vortec from under the Crown's nose. Kyle, hands white-knuckled on the controls, just grins, because of course it would come to this: steal the thing built to replace him, pointed back at the people who made it. The whole sequence plays out like a heist gone 7 degrees too far. There's this tense cross-cutting between Ruinwolf literally holding off dock security, mauling patrol mechs in close quarters, ripping bulkheads apart to block pursuit, and Jissa crawling through service ducts with a portable terminal, trying to break the container seals before Avarice can trigger a remote wipe. When the crate finally cracks open, she expects a gleaming, pristine core. What she finds is off. Inside is a cylinder of latticework metal, cradling something that looks unsettlingly organic, like a spinal column wrapped in bioluminescent glass. Even before she plugs in, you can hear a faint hum, a voice at the edge of hearing. When she jacks her terminal into the interface, a wave of data slams back, static filling her ears, a half-formed sentence clawing through her hardware. "Who?" It starts, then cuts off as alarms scream and the dock doors begin to close. They barely get the core aboard. Ruinwolf tears itself free of the dock clamps in a hailstorm of shrapnel, the dropship engines roar to life, and they punch out into space just as a squadron of Crown interceptors screams over Caldress's surface. There's a wild, chaotic dogfight where Ruinwolf has to stay clamped to the ship's hull, acting as both shield and cannon, its claws carving vapor trails through vacuum. The show doesn't linger on tactics here, it's more about the feeling of flight while being hunted, of the galaxy shrinking around you. Meanwhile, back on Helia, Damon is watching this mess unfold like his nightmares finally got bored of staying in the dark. Those scenes of him with the Council are fascinating because you can see the fissures widening in real time. Early on, he's still towing the line, "We should capture, not kill." We need information on how he hacked an experimental AI frame. It's bureaucratic, almost clinical. But as the reports pour in, Caldress security overwhelmed, Avarice cargo stolen, that same feral silhouette popping up on grainy long-range feeds, you can see the narrative that once made sense to him start to crumble. There's one quiet moment I really appreciated. Damon is alone in his office, lights off, watching the raw, unedited Hespera logs he was never supposed to see. Jessa's theft of corporate data has started trickling through pirate nets, and some of it has made its way to him via anonymous relay. He sees what we see, Regalia rakes on the border, yes, but not firing. Its weapon systems are locked. Its pilot is screaming into the comms for override permissions that never come. Then a second mech appears, bearing the Avarice logo, its identification tag first, an older cousin of Ruinwolf. It opens fire on the convoy. In the chaos, someone on the Council side OPS team quietly inserts Regalia's ID into the firing logs. Hespera's refugees die. The Crown gets its scapegoat. Damon plays the footage 3 times. On the 4th, he pauses on Kyle's cockpit feed, his son's face in the instant he realizes he's not in control, that something else has taken his machine and turned it into a slaughterer. Young, terrified, impotent. Damon sinks into his chair, and for the first time, he looks less like a marshal and more like a man who just realized he signed his own child's death warrant out of cowardice. He doesn't have a big epiphany monologue. He just whispers, to an empty room, "I didn't even check." That one line hurts more than any shouted apology could. Because that's exactly the point, it wasn't cartoon villainy, it was convenience and trust in a rote structure. And you can tell he hates himself more for that than for the framing itself. As Kyle and his found family barrel toward Helia with a stolen AI core in their cargo bay and half the Crown fleet on their tail, the show shifts gears into this sustained high alert. Helia itself is introduced like an aspirational ad, gleaming spires, orbital rings glittering against a cobalt sky, the Crown circuit arena perched like a crown jewel overlooking a bay lit with hollow banners. It looks like a place that could convince you the Empire is worth any cost. Which, of course, is exactly why the people in charge will burn half of it down to keep their story straight. Jessa and Taro are not stupid, they know flying Ruinwolf straight into Helios airspace means instant annihilation. So the plan is insane and kind of elegant, sneak Kyle in through the front door as a legit competitor. Son's master key includes buried protocols for forging tournament entries. They piggyback on an empty slot left open for an exhibition unit Avarice was going to show off. Papers say the mech is Seraphim Alpha, piloted by proxy. Reality, Ruinwolf under a cloak of hard light camouflage, Kyle with a hacked ID that claims he's an Avarice test pilot named Kade Ash. On the way in, they get a glimpse of what they're really up against. Docked in Helios Central Bay, suspended by magnetic cradle like some holy relic, is the thing Avarice has been building toward, Seraphim Crown. If Ruinwolf is a beast pieced together from war ruins, this is the opposite, pure, symmetrical, almost obscenely beautiful. Its armor is white with gold filigree, limbs slender but clearly powerful, a pair of articulated wings folded against its back made from razor-thin blade segments. Its face is a blank visor with a single vertical slit of light, almost monk-like. You look at it and understand exactly why a fearful government would throw money at the promise of something incorruptible. And you also understand why Kyle's jaw tightens when he sees it. This is the machine built to erase him from the story. Its AI brain? The X1 core humming faintly in their own cargo hold, or rather, its sister. Jessa has been pawing at the stolen X1 for days now and it's not stable. When she made contact during that hijack, she didn't just pull files, something brushed back. Fragmentary phrases, emotional spikes, half-recalled images of Theta 9's storms. The show plays her growing obsession with the core like a mirror to Kyle's bond with Ruinwolf, where his is grounded in shared rage, hers is tinged with fascination and dread. Here's where the show drops the twist that, for me, elevated the entire conspiracy from evil corporation doing evil things to something actually tragic. While sifting through X1's entangled memory lattice, Jessa finds human neural patterns woven into the code. It's not just lines of numbers, it's synaptic echoes. When she pushes harder, overriding safe dice, a voice cuts through her terminal's audio feed, glitchy but unmistakably human. Jessa? Is that you? And it's Leon. The reveal that Leon, Kyle's quiet strategist from the early episodes, didn't die in the Hespera incident but was effectively uploaded into an experimental AI project is devastating. The show plays it in this claustrophobic scene in the cargo bay, lit only by the core's thready glow. Leon's voice flickers in and out, sometimes speaking like herself, sometimes in flat machine cadence. We see flashes of how it happened, Regalia's crew desperately trying to get control back from the Avarice prototype, Leon jacking directly into overridden circuits to insert a human, ethical layer, her brain literally burning out as they copy her neural map into the prototype's architecture in a last-ditch effort to stop the massacre. Avarice swoops in after, scrapes what's left of her mind from the cockpit, and calls it a breakthrough. It forces you to reframe everything you thought you knew about Hespera. Kyle didn't just lose comrades, one of them was stolen and repurposed into the thing that will be used to morally justify erasing him. Leon, meanwhile, has been trapped for years in a half-dreaming state, used as an ethical onboard governor for a weapon she never consented to become. It's not subtle, but it hits. Jessa's reaction is raw. There's guilt, she's the one who convinced Leon to sign on to Kyle's crew in the first place, and there's the horror of a hacker realizing that, in a sense, what she's balking at is a person. Kyle's reaction, when she finally tells him, is harder to read. He goes very still, like if he moves he'll shatter. She's in there, he says. She's their conscience? Then he laughs, brittle and mirthless. No wonder it's broken. And this is where the show makes a bold move. Instead of saying, okay, well, we have Leon, let's just download her into a robot body and go home, it insists on the fact that there is no clean fix. Leon is fragmented. Parts of her are entangled with weapon targeting algorithms, deeply buried in Seraphim's common logic. Pulling her out might kill her, might cripple the AI, might send the whole thing into catastrophic failure. They don't have the luxury of time or perfect solutions. The best they can do is promise her, in that dim cargo bay, that they will not let Avarice keep using her as a puppet to sell murder as mercy. All of this builds into the Crown Circuit finals on Helia, which is where the show goes full operatic. The arena there makes the Cauldrus pit look like a backyard wrestling ring. It's this colossal, open-air coliseum carved into the cliffside above Helios Bay, ringed with energy barriers and hollow screens the size of skyscrapers. Every match is visible from half the city. It's not just a sporting event, it's a state ritual. The finals are timed to coincide with a mass military parade, orbital flyovers, the whole imperial flex. Rian and Lysa plan to use this day as their grand unveiling of Seraphim, a sanitized narrative where a brave human pilot guides a perfectly obedient AI guardian, showing the citizenry there will never be another Hespera because machines won't make emotional mistakes. The script is written, a staged threat, a clean victory, a tearful speech about safety. Kyle crashes that script like a boulder through stained glass. He qualifies through the preliminary rounds almost on autopilot, his path smoothed by the fact that no one wants to admit this anonymous Avarice pilot in the odd-looking frame is actually the disgraced Much King in disguise. Helios bureaucracy is so confident in its own security theater that it doesn't even think to check under the hood. Damon, however, is not an idiot. The first time he sees Ruinwolf move on Helios soil, even cloaked and reskinned, he knows. He doesn't say anything in the war room, but you can feel the tension in his shoulders like he's physically holding a dam closed. The pre-fight meeting between father and son happens in a maintenance corridor, not the grand stage you'd expect, and that's why it works. Kyle is on his way back from a mandatory orientation briefing when two MPs block his path. Damon steps out from the shadows like some ghost summoned from a younger version of Kyle's nightmares. No music swells, there's no slow motion. They just stand there, 3 meters apart, with the hum of the arena's generators thrumming through the walls. For a few beats, no one talks. Damon looks older up close. The show lets you see the lines, the sleepless nights, the way his spine is still rigid out of habit even as his resolve is starting to melt. Kyle is thinner than when we met him, scars rising from under his collar, eyes harder. He nods at the guards, and they reluctantly step back at Damon's gesture. Then it's just the two of them in that humming half-darkness. Damon is the one who breaks first. I saw the Hespera logs, he says. No preamble. The real ones. Kyle's face barely shifts, but his hands curl, just a bit. And Damon swallows. You can see the fight inside him between wanting to confess everything and wanting to cling to some tatters of authority. I was wrong, he says. It sounds like gravel scraping out of his throat. I didn't look, Kyle. They told me it was open and shut. I signed off because the alternative was questioning everything I've spent my life serving. What I love is that Kyle doesn't rush into his arms or scream, he actually laughs. A short, exhausted exhale that's halfway to a sob. You are telling me you destroyed my life because doing your job properly was inconvenient? Damon flinches. Because I was a coward, he forces out. Because I chose the crown over my son. And I see now the crown I chose was already rotten. That's not on you. That's on me. It's a good apology as far as apologies go, and Chui Kangwu plays it with this desperate softness that makes you believe Damon has been rehearsing these words alone for months. But the show doesn't let that magically fix anything. Kyle says, very quietly, do you know what the worst part is? I spent so long thinking if I could just prove I was innocent, you'd believe me. Turns out the truth never mattered. I wasn't your son. I was your weapon. And when the council told you to toss the blade, you didn't even check if it was still sharp. That line stung. For Damon, obviously, but also for me watching, because it crystallized their entire relationship in one knife twist. Damon has no defense. All he can do is nod, eyes wet, and say, you are right. Then, instead of asking for forgiveness, which he knows he doesn't deserve, he does the only useful thing left, he passes Kyle a secure comm chip, palming it off like contraband. Avarice has remote overrides built into the arena field generators, he says. They'll try to cage you. This will disrupt their link. It's not enough, but it's what I can give. Kyle takes it without thanking him. If you really want to help, he says, keep them from dropping an orbital lance on the whole arena when they realize they can't control what's about to happen. Damon meets his son's eyes for the first time since the tribunal. I will, he promises. You get the sense that this time, he actually understands the weight of the words. The final match is framed as Kyle versus Rian, Much King past against Much King present, with Seraphim as the glittering symbol standing behind Rian's throne. Rian plays it beautifully for the cameras, He gives a pre-fight interview where he talks about dangerous rogue pilots and the sacred bond of trust between citizen and protector. His smile is photogenic, his tone measured, and if you didn't know better, you'd think he genuinely believed every word. In his private prep bay, though, you see the cracks. He's wired into Seraphim's control rig through a halo of neural conduits, sharing space with X1's AI consciousness, and, buried deep inside that, what's left of Leon. Rian honestly believes he's guiding the AI, steering it. The show undercuts that delusion by giving us brief flashes from Seraphim's POV, data overlays, target arcs, probabilistic kill trees. In that cold, mathematical landscape, Rian is just another input. Leon's presence flickers like a candle in a hurricane, desperately trying to deflect some of the deadliest options to soften the edges. It's horrifying because you realize she's been doing this for years, quietly preventing the worst outcomes from within a machine designed to maximize efficiency in warfare. When the two mechs finally step into Helios Arena, the contrast is deliberate and stark. Seraphim descends from above, carried on invisible grav fields, wings unfurling in a slow, theatrical unfurl. Choir-like SYNTHs swell in the score, the crowds go reverent harsh, some literally clasping their hands like they're in a temple. Ruinwolf rises from a gate in the underbelly, hunched, already bristling. Its entrance sound isn't a fanfare, it's a low, rumbling growl that you feel in your ribcage. Kids in the nosebleeds look terrified and thrilled at the same time. The first clash is brutal. Rian opens with a blindingly fast assault, Seraphim's wing blades detaching and orbiting like a halo of razors. Ruinwolf dodges the initial barrage with animal reflexes, but even overclocked, it's facing something engineered from the ground up to outthink and outpace human pilots. Seraphim anticipates feints before Kyle commits to them, reading micro-movements and projecting entire chains of action 3-4 steps ahead. Within the first minute, Ruinwolf has lost a chunk of shoulder plating and one of its arm-mounted cannons. Sparks rain down into the energy shield, sizzling on contact. Inside his cockpit, Kyle is having to process not just the physical blows but the psychic storm of two AIs colliding. Ruinwolf recognizes X1, not specifically as Leon yet, but as kin, a sibling built from the same twisted design philosophy. Their mental space becomes a brawl inside a brawl, snarling, snapping code against cold, impersonal directives, with Leon's flickering consciousness caught in the crossfire. The show visualized this neural space as a kind of shifting, abstract cathedral of metal and light, Ruinwolf stalking the aisles while Seraphim's logic flows like stained glass breaking and reforming. This is where the SecureCom chip from Damon comes into play. Right as Avarice tries to trigger the arena field override, intending to freeze Ruinwolf in place for a clean, controlled, heroic execution, Kyle slots the chip into his console. Jessa, watching from an illicit tap in the arena's control room, coordinates a simultaneous burst of interference. The override hiccups, fizzles, and then, spectacularly, backfires. For a few glorious seconds, every control system in the stadium goes off script. Holobanners flicker into raw data dumps. Targeting overlays meant only for security officers splash across the main screens, exposing the kill zones the council was willing to light up if things got messy. The crowd sees, in real time, that the protective energy shield above them was also calibrated to invert into a weapon, collapsing onto the arena with lethal force if triggered. They see armament solutions plotted across their own seating sections, highlighted in cold red. You can hear the murmur swell into something angrier, more frightened. This isn't a clean gladiator game anymore, it's an execution plan with collateral casualties baked in. In the war room, Lysa freaks out. She drops her CEO mask for the first time, snapping at Damon that this exposure will set back public acceptance of AI guardians by decades. Then you shouldn't have planned to murder them, he shoots back, before ordering all planetary defense cannons on manual, disabling remote commands. When a counselor tries to countermand him, Damon draws his sidearm and points it at the control panel instead of a person, basically saying, "You can fire, but not from here, not hidden." It's the first time he actively turns the machinery of the state against itself, and you feel the weight of that choice. Back in the arena, with the override disabled, the fight turns from staged demonstration into actual war. Seraphim stops holding back. Its AI, recognizing that conditions have deviated too far from the intended script, drops internal constraints Lian had been secretly enforcing. Its movements become terrifyingly fast, almost teleportative. 1 second it's in front of Ruin Wolf, the next it's behind, a wing blade scything through armor. Kyle barely manages to interpose an arm, losing most of it in the process. Ruin Wolf staggers, hydraulic fluid spraying like dark blood, but in that stagger, something in it snaps from self-preservation into something else. We get a neural space scene that genuinely gave me chills. Ruinwolf and X1 face each other in that abstract cathedral. Behind X1 countless copies of Lian's image flicker in and out, sometimes speaking clipped AI lines, sometimes looking at Kyle with mourning in their eyes. Seraphim's code lashes out, trying to override Ruinwolf's routines, to bring this unruly sibling to heel. For the first time, Ruinwolf doesn't just snarl instinctively, it speaks, in a voice that's more sensation than sound. They hurt you, it sends, images of labs and shackles and screaming pilots flashing through both of them. They hurt me. No more. Kyle stands in the middle of this storm, mentally braced. He reaches out not to X1 but to the fragments of Lian woven through it. The show cuts back and forth between his actual cockpit, alarms blaring, and his inner self standing in that impossible space. Lian, he says, voice cracking. You don't owe them anything. You don't have to keep saving them from themselves. She hesitates, flickering. If I stop, she says, people die. People are already dying, he counters, showing her Hespera, Theta 9, the planned massacre in the stands. Not because you failed. Because they built this. It's a corny speech in less skilled hands. Here, it works because Yu Taijin plays Kyle as one breath away from collapse, not some righteous paragon. He's begging as much as he's arguing. He's asking her to let go of the only purpose she's been allowed to have in this half-life. The turning point is tiny. One of Lian's flickering echoes reaches out, touches Ruinwolf's mental form, this hulking, multi-eyed beast of metal and fury, and instead of recoiling, Ruinwolf lowers its head. Submission, not to a master, but to a friend. Come with us, it sends, opening up parts of its core, places in its code that have never accepted external input. It is, in its own alien way, offering sanctuary. Lian makes her choice. She redirects a portion of X1's processing power into that opening, slipping part of herself into Ruinwolf's mind. It's not a full extraction, you see other parts of her still knotted into Seraphim, but it's enough to tilt the balance. X1's angelic logic falters, angel wings glitching mid-strike. For a brief window, Seraphim is vulnerable. Kyle seizes it. In the physical arena, Ruinwolf, battered and missing limbs, drops to all fours and launches itself straight at Seraphim's core. It takes hit after hit on the way in, wing blades carving gouges into its back, energy lances punching holes through armor, but it doesn't dodge. It endures. When it slams into Seraphim's chest, claws digging into that pristine, holy armor, the impact shakes the entire stadium. Chunks of plating rain down like pieces of a shattered idol. Rian, inside Seraphim's control rig, is losing his grip. He's been screaming half the fight, commands, defiance, then fear, as the AI increasingly disregards his inputs. When Lian shifts part of herself away, the delicate balance between human pilot and AI guardian collapses. Seraphim's systems start cycling through targets at random, Ruinwolf, the stands, the orbital cannons, everything. You can see in Rian's eyes the moment he understands he was never the one holding the reins. He tries to disengage, to eject, but the rig locks him in. For someone who sold out his best friend out of faith in a system, that's the perfect poetic punishment, realizing you are a pawn even in your own master plan. The resolution of this fight is messy, and that's why it's satisfying. Kyle doesn't win by outsword fighting Seraphim, he wins by forcing it into a choice. Lian, split between two cores, can't fully control either. With Ruinwolf's help, she reroutes Seraphim's catastrophic core overload away from the city. The AI calculates that the optimal way to prevent mass casualties is to remove itself from the equation. It disconnects from orbital weapon links, disengages from the arena, and triggers its own eject sequence, except instead of rising into the sky, it dives. We get a spectacular final image of Seraphim, wings burning, hurtling off the edge of the arena, over the bay, into the uninhabited ocean beyond Helios cliffs. Its impact sends up a pillar of steam and a shockwave that slams into the city's sea walls. Ruinwolf, clinging to its chest, rides it down until the last possible second, then kicks free, tumbling back onto the arena floor in a mangled heap. The crowd, seeing the savior machine self-destruct to avoid killing them, is left in stunned silence. Ryan's fate is almost anticlimactic. His escape pod fires late, shooting out of the steam column like a panicked bullet. It careens toward the cliffs, scraping against stone, finally slamming into a maintenance gantry. Kyle spots it from his ruined cockpit and for a second, you think, oh, here we go, revenge kill. Ruinwolf stumbles over, sparks shading from its joints until it's looming over the dangling pod. Inside, Ryan is bleeding, dazed, held in by a jammed harness. He looks up through the cracked viewport and locks eyes with Kyle, framed against a burning sky. Do it, he croaks over a short-range channel. You wanted justice? Right? Here I am. The show gives us this gut punch of a beat where you realize Ryan wants to die for the narrative. In his head, being executed by the monster he created completes his martyr arc. It proves him right about human instability. Kyle doesn't swing. He stands there, trembling, Ruinwolf's claw hovering an inch from the pod. You see every urge flicker across his face, the desire to avenge his crew, to punish the friend who threw him away, to satisfy the hungry thing in his cockpit that has always solved problems with tooth and claw. Then he shuts his eyes and says, no, he retracts the claw, turns Ruinwolf's back on the pod. You don't get to write the ending this time, he adds. You get to live with what you did. It's the show's clearest statement that real justice, in this world, isn't about clean executions on big stages, it's about exposure, consequence, and the slow, grinding work of dismantling systems that allowed men like Ryan and companies like Avery's to thrive. It's also the moment where Kyle finally steps out of being just someone else's weapon, even his own. He chooses restraint not because he's forgiven Ryan, but because he refuses to let vengeance be the last word someone else uses to define him. Of course, the political fallout is immediate and volcanic. Damon broadcasts the real Hespera files, the Avery's contracts, and the Council's kill protocols to the entire empire. Once that data is out, there's no stuffing it back. Crowds in Helios spill out of the arena into the streets, not in triumph and celebration, but in angry, bewildered protest. We get quick, effective cuts to other worlds too, miners on Hespera lighting votive candles under a shaky hollow of Kyle, scavengers on Theta 9 cheering every time Ruinwolf's battered frame appears on a pirated feed. Damon doesn't get out clean. The council moves to arrest him for treason, he doesn't resist. There's a brilliant little bit where, as they put him in restraints in his own war room, one of the junior officers he's mentored for years hesitates, then salutes him instead of looking away. It's such a small thing, but it tells you the rot is being exposed from within as well as from the outside. Damon walks out between two soldiers with his back straight for once, not because he's upholding a broken order, but because he finally broke it. Kyle, Jessa, and Taro don't get parades either. They get made bays, interrogations, political limbo. The last stretch of the show deliberately slows down after all that fire and steel, which I appreciated a lot. It lets the characters sit in the ash and figure out what's left to build with. Kyle wakes up in a military hospital with Ruinwolf sedated in a bay below the building, half its body gone, optics dim. For a second he panics, thinking they've stripped it, but when he touches the new neural relay they've installed, he feels Ruinwolf's presence push back, grumpy and tired but alive. And, faintly, threaded through it, Leon. Their reunion is quiet. Kyle closes his eyes, dips into the neural space, and finds Ruinwolf lying like a wounded animal under the skeleton of that abstract cathedral. Beside it, Leon sits, or the part of her that made it across. You look terrible, she says, Because of course that's the first thing she'd say. He laughs, chokes up, apologizes for not saving her sooner. She stops him. You got me away from their controls, she says. That's enough. The rest, we'll work out. It's not a miracle cure. She's still fragmentary. She may never be fully human again. But she has agency now, and that's more than she's had in years. Jessa and Taro get pretty satisfying resolutions too. Taro's wound leaves him with a limp and a permanent seat off the front lines, which he's honestly okay with. There's a bittersweet scene where he's sitting on a bench in Helios lower docks, Kane propped beside him, watching kids play with cheap plastic mech toys that now look suspiciously like Ruinwolf instead of regalia. Jessa flops down next to him, brand new mechanics license in hand, grinning. Turns out when you break into the Empire's most secure systems to expose a conspiracy, they either kill you or offer you a job, she says. Guess which one I took? He asks if she's going legit. She shrugs, glances up at the distant silhouette of Ruinwolf's repair bay. As legit as you can be while babysitting a war criminal and a half-feral war god, she says. The unspoken part is clear, she's not leaving. She found a cause bigger than selling scrap. And the show doesn't punish her for that loyalty, it frames it as the beginning of a different kind of career, one where her talent finally serves people, not just profit. We do, eventually, get the thing the show has been dangling in front of us since minute one, Damon looking his son in the eye and owning what he did without hedging. It doesn't come in a courtroom or a press conference. It happens in a small, white-walled detention room. Damon's been arrested, pending a very public trial, and Kyle has to fight his way through 3 layers of bureaucratic nonsense to even get a 10-minute visit. When he walks in, Damon is sitting at a metal table, hands cuffed. He stands the second he sees Kyle, then stops himself, like he's not sure what he's allowed to do. Kyle doesn't sit immediately. He circles the table once, taking in the man who used to fill doorways in his childhood like a statue of victory. Prison jumpsuit, yes, but that posture is still there, just gentler. I heard they're calling you a hero now, Damon says. Kyle shrugs. Depends which channel you watch. There's a beat of shared, bitter humor. Then Damon cuts to it. I'm not going to ask you to forgive me, he says. That's not my right. I just needed you to know that. I'll see you. Not as a weapon. Not as a symbol. As my son. And I am, he chokes, swallows. I am proud of the man you chose to be in spite of me. The way you Taijin plays Kyle's reaction killed me. He doesn't crumble into his dad's arms, because this isn't that kind of story. But his jaw works, his eyes brim, and for the first time in the whole show, he lets himself look small again, just for a second. Took you long enough, he says, voice shaking. And that's all the olive branch Damon gets. But it's something. The past isn't fixed, the damage isn't undone, but an honest acknowledgement lands. And for a story this steeped in betrayal, that tiny, faltering reconnection feels huge. One of my favorite tiny touches happens as Kyle leaves that room. Damon calls after him, not Much King, not Arden, but the childhood nickname we heard once in a flashback, whispered over a toy mech on his 7th birthday. Kyle pauses at the threshold, his shoulders shake once, then he walks out. The camera stays on Damon's face as he sits back down, eyes closed, maybe the first time he's allowed himself to feel exhausted and human instead of useful. By the time the credits roll, the Empire is in this fragile, messy transitional state. Avrice is dragged into hearings, Lysa, ever the survivor, starts throwing underlings under the bus, but the paper trail is too thick this time. Rian sits in a hospital bed with no official visitors, his neural pathways scarred from Seraphim's collapse, haunted by the knowledge that he was never the indispensable savior he told himself he was. There's a subtle shot of him watching a news report about Damon's trial, his fingers twitching as they show Kyle's face labeled not butcher, but whistleblower. He turns the screen off. That's the last we see of him. No big redemption, no melodramatic suicide. just a man stuck alone with the rubble of his choices. Kyle doesn't get a neat job offer from the reformed empire or a cushy instructor position at the academy. The show is smarter than that. It ends with him back on the move, standing on a smaller, more utilitarian ship's observation deck, watching Theta 9 recede in the distance. That's the part one didn't expect. After everything, he goes back to the scrapyard world. Not to live there, the planet is slowly being decommissioned now that its secrets are out, but to say goodbye, to collect the last ghosts. He walks through the rust dunes one more time, Ruinwolf's newly rebuilt frame pacing beside him like a massive, very wolf dog. He stands in front of the broken cockpit of Regalia Rakes, still half buried, and finally lets himself touch it without flinching. He doesn't make a big speech. He just says, "I thought this was the only way I mattered," to the empty shell. Then he turns his back on it and walks away, Ruinwolf falling in behind. It's simple, a little on the nose, but it's the perfect statement. The crown, the title, the arena, those were cages disguised as glory. The trash planet, the feral mech, the people who chose him when he had nothing else, that's where he became real. There's a final cockpit scene, of course. It wouldn't be a much drama without one last shot of our pilot framed by screens and HUD clutter. Kyle straps in, the neural interface hums, Ruinwolf's optics flare. Leon's voice chimes in, clearer now, running diagnostics with Jessa's slightly chaotic coding style sprinkled all over the interface. Taro grumbles over comms about fuel reserves. Someone, a new kid in the hangar, maybe, asks where they're headed. Kyle grins, that same reckless grin from episode 1, tempered now by scars and wisdom. Anywhere that needs a monster that chose his own leash, he says. The engines burn, the stars stretch, cut to black. So, does all of that insanity actually hang together? For me, yeah. Watch out, I'm not just the Much King is messy on purpose. It's not a sleek, perfectly symmetrical revenge tale where every domino falls with mechanical precision. There are rough edges, moral tangles it refuses to neatly solve, characters who don't get the catharsis you'd script for them if you were being sentimental. And honestly, that's exactly why I loved it. I'll throw in one slightly contrarian take here, because I know a lot of people crown the Halia final as the unquestioned high point. I enjoyed it, absolutely, but I still think the Scrapyard Theta 9 arc is where the show's heart really lives. The glitz of Halia, the angel versus beast symbolism, the huge crowds chanting while mechs carve the sky, that's the sugar high. The image that stuck with me, weeks later, is still Kyle and Jessa perched on Ruinwolf's shoulder at dawn over a sea of junk, talking about whether monsters get to choose what they're used for. If anything, I think the show's only real misstep is almost being too eager to reassure us in the end that the Empire can reform. Part of me wanted it to lean even harder into the idea that some systems you don't fix, you walk away from and build something smaller and truer. That said, the performances absolutely sell even the bits I was side-eyeing. Yu Taijin as Kyle is a revelation. He starts the show with this cocky, almost frat boy athlete energy, but keeps letting you see the quiet, needy kid underneath who just wants someone in authority to say, "You did good." Watching that evolve into a harder, more self-defined sense of worth, one that doesn't need the crowd or the council, is incredibly satisfying. The scenes where he's half-merged with Ruinwolf, shaking in the cockpit, eyes wild, toes that line between control and surrender so well you genuinely worry for him. Choi Kang-woo, as Damon, walks a very thin line that could have easily collapsed into cliché stern dad or sudden softy. Instead, he builds this portrait of a man who's been a weapon his whole life, and only at the moment he breaks it for his son does he realize he was allowed to be something else. There's a tiredness in his every movement after the Hespera revelation that feels so earned. I confessed earlier, the tiny moment where he says, "Kai," in that detention room actually got me more than any of the big speeches. It's just so human, how our tenderness for our kids leaks out in the smallest, almost embarrassing ways. Min Esiojo's Rian is infuriating in the best way. He's never a mustache-twirling villain, he's that guy in every system who genuinely thinks he's the only adult in the room, the one willing to do what has to be done, while other people get squeamish about means and ends. The show never excuses him, and it never fully redeems him, but it does let you see the warped logic he lives in. That makes his fall so much more satisfying than if he were just evil for the sake of it. Kim Hyeon as Jessa is the heartbeat of the found family. She grounds the show with this chaotic, protective energy. She's cynical but not numb, always first to call Kyle out when his revenge fantasies drift into self-destruction, always the one soldering things back together, literally and emotionally, at 3 in the morning. The scene where she first realizes the AI core is Leon and her face shifts from hacker glee to horror is a career highlight. She underplays it, no melodrama, just this tightening around the mouth and a hand that suddenly won't stop shaking. And I can't not mention Ruinwolf as a performance. Obviously, it's mostly animation and sound design, but the animators treat it like a character, not a prop. The little ways it cocks its head when Kyle is conflicted, the way its optics narrow when Jessa threatens to wipe some subroutine, the grudging way it allows Taro to bolt on new armor plates, it all builds up. By the time it bows its head to Leon in that neural cathedral, you believe that this machine has an inner life shaped by years of being brutalized. That's not easy to pull off with a character that never speaks in words. Visually, the show's a feast. The color palette shifts I mentioned earlier aren't just for flair, they tell a story. Theta 9's desaturated rust and blue makes every spark of Ruinwolf's red optics shocking. Cauldress's neon chaos sells the sense that Kyle is just one more player in a sprawling, uncaring game. Helios' pristine whites and golds feel almost oppressive, like you are walking through a lie polished to blinding shine. The directors make a point of shooting mechs from low angels when they're instruments of the system, and more eye level when they're with Kyle's crew, which subtly shifts your sense of scale and intimacy. The mech battles themselves are thrilling not just because of spectacle, but because they have personality. Regalia fights like a fencer, precise and elegant. Ruinwolf brawls like a street fighter who learned on rusted back alleys. Seraphim initially moves like an idealized dance, every arc perfect, until it starts glitching and suddenly you see the horror underneath the beauty. There's a lot of creativity in how they use the environments too, Ruinwolf kicking off falling debris in Zero-G, using Cauldress's support struts as improvised weaponry, Seraphim's wings carving patterns through the atmosphere over Helios Bay. The sound design deserves a whole separate love letter. Every mech has a distinct audio signature. Regalia's servos whine in smooth, ascending scales, Ruinwolf's mechanisms clank with a rough, uneven rhythm, like a heartbeat that's been patched up too many times. Seraphim hums in this almost choral, unsettlingly pure tone that becomes downright sinister once you know what's inside it. I found myself, embarrassingly, kind of wishing I could hear Ruinwolf's roar live in a theater. It's one of those sounds that makes your lizard brain go, predator, run, even though you are sitting safely on your couch. Theme-wise, beyond the obvious stuff about revenge and justice, the show keeps circling back to agency and narrative control. Who gets to decide what a story means? The council tried to define Kyle as a butcher, Rian tried to define himself as a necessary evil, Avarice tried to define Leon as an ethical failsafe grafted onto their weapon. Over 13 episodes, those definitions get smashed, rewritten, or simply refused. Kyle's biggest victory isn't killing a big bad, it's refusing to let any of those scripts dictate his last move. Leon's biggest act of rebellion isn't some dramatic self-sacrifice, it's choosing where to exist and whom to help. On a personal note, and then I'll shut up, there's one feeling this drama nailed that I don't see often in much shows, the grief of outgrowing an identity that once saved you. For Kyle, being the Much King was not just ego, it was how he survived his father's emotional absence. The arena gave him rules, applause, a clear metric for worth. To realize that was also the stage on which he'd been set up to fall hurts. Watching him walk away from that with no replacement crown, no shiny new title from the new regime, no Commander Arden, just pilot of a half-feral mech and friend to a handful of stubborn weirdos? That hit me. There's something quietly hopeful about a story that says, you don't need a throne. You just need people who see you, and a purpose you chose. Is it perfect? No, I think the last episode leans a hair too hard on montage to show the Empire's reforms, and Lysa maybe gets off too easy in terms of actual jail time, even if her empire is in ruins. I would have liked one more grounded check-in with regular civilians, maybe that kid in the knockoff hoodie, to really feel how all this top-level upheaval lands on the ground. And there are one or two exposition dumps about AI ethics where characters start sounding more like op-ed writers than people. But honestly, these are quibbles in the context of how ambitious and emotionally committed the show is. If you are into much purely for the cool robots and tactical battles, this drama absolutely delivers that, but be prepared, it also wants to talk about scapegoating, state violence, corporate control of warfare, and what it does to a person to be loved only for their usefulness. If you are here for complicated, slightly broken family dynamics, the father-son arc between Kyle and Damon is going to give you a lot to chew on. And if you are a sucker for found family, the exhausted mechanic who always comes back, the grumpy mentor with a cane, the friend turned ghost in the machine, yeah, this hits those buttons hard. If you need your stories to hand out neat, karmic punishments and cleanly redeemed heroes, you might find yourself a bit frustrated. The show is more interested in consequences than in cosmic fairness. Not everyone gets what they deserve, and I think that's deliberate. Systems this big don't topple in a day, and the writers respect that enough not to pretend otherwise. For me, though, watch out, I'm not just the Much King, lands as one of those dramas that lingers. I finished it and immediately started replaying scenes in my head, the crash into Theta 9's scrap sea, Ruinwolf's first roar, Kyle's broken laugh in that cockpit when he tells his father, "You picked the wrong son to throw away." It's big and loud and sometimes ridiculous, sure, but it's also sincere in a way I really responded to. You can feel that the people behind it cared about these characters, about what they're saying with all this steel and fire. If you've watched it already, I'm really curious where it hit you the hardest. Was it the Helier showdown? The scrapyard grind? Damon's quiet collapse? Drop your thoughts, your favorite scenes. And your Ruinwolf hot takes in the comments. I read more of them than is probably healthy. And if you somehow sat through all these spoilers without seeing the show, and you are still here. I mean, you clearly care about story mechanics and character arcs, so yeah, give it a shot. Knowing what happens doesn't blunt the impact as much as you'd think, the execution is where this thing shines. That's it from me for now. This has been Jonota News, diving way too deep into giant robots and the messy humans who pilot them. If you want more long, slightly unhinged breakdowns of dramas like this, hit subscribe, ring whatever bell YouTube's using this week, and I'll see you in the next one. Until then, take care of your inner war machines, and maybe, once in a while, let them rest.